It's July 2014. A biotech founder in a black turtleneck stands on a stage in Palo Alto and tells a room full of investors that a single drop of blood, drawn from a finger, can now answer almost any question a doctor might ask. No needles, no labs, no waiting. The company is called Theranos. The founder is 29 years old. Her name is Elizabeth Holmes. Behind closed doors, a smaller number of people already know something different. A device that is supposed to run more than 200 different tests cannot reliably run most of them. But that fact hasn't left the building yet. It's 2003. Holmes drops out of Stanford at 19 and files a patent for a wearable drug delivery patch. That idea doesn't survive contact with reality. But the pitch evolves fast. The patch becomes a blood testing device, and the device becomes a company. She names it Theranos, a blend of therapy and diagnosis. She recruits a board that reads like a foreign policy briefing, a former Secretary of State, a former Secretary of Defense, retired senators and generals. None of them are doctors. None of them are lab scientists. Money follows credibility, and credibility in Silicon Valley often follows the room a person is standing in. Investors write checks. According to later SEC filings, the company eventually raises more than $700 million. By 2014, Theranos is valued at $9 billion. On paper, Holmes's stake alone is worth $4.5 billion. She is, briefly, the youngest self-made female billionaire in the country. The pitch is simple, and it is seductive. The company's device, nicknamed Edison, promises lab-grade accuracy from a few drops of blood pricked from a finger, cheaper, faster, less painful than a traditional draw. In 2013, Theranos opens wellness centers inside Walgreens stores, starting in Palo Alto. Safeway, too, quietly begins building space for the technology in its stores. The story writes itself, a young founder democratizing healthcare, one finger prick at a time. Here is the mechanism prosecutors would later lay out in federal court. The Edison device, according to the government's case, could reliably perform only a small fraction of the tests Theranos was marketing. To keep the promise alive in front of patients and partners, the company allegedly ran a significant share of real patient samples not on its own proprietary technology, but on modified commercial blood analyzers made by outside manufacturers, machines it publicly implied it didn't need. Meanwhile, prosecutors alleged Holmes and her company presented investors and partners with validation reports and financial projections that overstated what the technology could do and what revenue already existed. Inside the building, the company is compartmentalized by design. Engineers on one team don't know what the lab team knows. The lab team doesn't know what finance is telling investors. Employees who raise concerns describe being met with ironclad NDAs, legal threats, and quiet exits. A culture of secrecy isn't a side effect here. Prosecutors would later argue it was the architecture, and this is where the paper trail begins. Two employees, both under 30, start pulling at the same thread from different directions. Tyler Schultz, grandson of board member George Schultz, grows uneasy about the lab's proficiency testing and quality control. Erika Chung, a lab associate, sees firsthand how few tests the Edison machines can actually run compared to what's being told to patients and doctors. Both raise internal concerns. Both are, according to later accounts, pushed toward the door. One of them eventually reaches a journalist. John Carreyrou, an investigative reporter at the Wall Street Journal, starts digging. In October 2015, the journal publishes the first of what becomes a series, sourced in part from former employees, alleging the company's flagship technology could not do what it claimed. The response from Theranos is combative. Lawyers are sent, denials are issued, but regulators are already moving. The Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services inspects the company's lab in Newark, California, and documents deficiencies serious enough, the agency finds, to pose immediate jeopardy to patient health. In 2016, CMS revokes the lab certification and bars Holmes from operating a clinical lab for 2 years. Walgreens, which had staked its own credibility on the partnership, terminates the relationship and files suit. Safeway quietly walks away from a partnership that never fully launched to the public. By 2018, the company that was once valued at $9 billion has no revenue-generating product, no lab certification, and no path forward. In March of that year, the SEC charges Holmes and former company president Ramesh Balwani with what the agency calls an elaborate, years-long fraud against investors. Holmes settles the civil case without admitting or denying wrongdoing, a $500,000 penalty, the surrender of millions of shares, and a 10-year bar from serving as an officer or director of a public company. The same year, the Department of Justice brings criminal wire fraud charges against both Holmes and Balwani. By September 2018, Theranos formally dissolves. The criminal trial takes until 2021 to begin, and it runs for months. In January 2022, a jury convicts Holmes on 4 counts. 3 counts of wire fraud and 1 count of conspiracy, all tied to defrauding investors. She is acquitted on the counts tied to defrauding patients directly. Balwani, tried separately, is convicted later that year on all 12 counts against him, covering both investors and patients. In November 2022, Holmes is sentenced to 11 years and 3 months in federal prison. Balwani receives a sentence of nearly 13 years. Holmes reports to prison in the spring of 2023. What the case leaves behind isn't just a company. It's a template and a warning about how far a compelling story can travel before anyone checks the math. Board members with foreign policy resumes and zero laboratory experience. A product that was never independently validated by the outside experts qualified to validate it. A workforce kept in the dark by design so that no single employee could see the whole picture. None of these were hidden. They were, in hindsight, visible the entire time. The red flag to remember is this: when a company's board is full of prestige and empty of expertise in the very field it operates in, that isn't a detail. That's the whole story, waiting to be read. This case file is closed, but there's always another one. Follow and subscribe to the Paper Trail, and I'll see you next week with the new exciting stories.